Hi, I'm Spiro with SP Wood Art, and thank you for joining me. I have been recently receiving a few messages from some subscribers and some non-subscribers asking me if there's any differences in my turning pen method for acrylic blanks versus wood blanks, and there are some differences, and I'd like to show you them. There are many types of materials that you can make a pen out of, and in this video I'm going to show you how I make a pen out of an acrylic, generalizing meaning a plastic. There are different types of plastic pen blanks that you can buy or make yourself, as in polyester, aluminite, which is a polyurethane resin, an epoxy, and the list goes on. The pen blank that I'm going to use today was purchased at PSI, Penn State Industries, as well as my kit that I'm going to use, and that is a polyester resin blank. And they smell horrible when you machine them. I've already cut my pen blank in half in the pink section, and now I am going to mark the centers. Here are some different types of tubes I can use for this 7mm pen kit. It comes with brass, but I'm not going to use brass because the pen blank that I have is fairly transparent, and I want it to have a light color when it's finished, so I'm going to use this white painted tube that I have. And I buy these extra tubes at hobby stores. Here I have a couple of leftovers from previous pens. They're just a little bit longer than the tubes that came with the kit, so I just need to shorten them so they're the right length. And I'll accomplish this task by using my belt sander. I'm going to put both tubes, the pen kit tube, the brass one, and the white one that's longer, in a little V groove block that I have, and I'll just sand them flush. And in my opinion, here is the most difficult step in making an acrylic pen, is drilling the blank without having it blow out the bottom, crack, or chip. One thing I do different here than I do drilling wood blanks is I go extremely slow, and I go in and out relief cuts probably 3 times as much as I do on a wood blank. Though I'm using a brad point tip drill bit right now, I generally wouldn't recommend using this type of bit. This is the only 7mm bit I have on hand, but I would use a regular tipped drill bit. Also, I'd like to mention, if you're using a drill vise clamp like I have, or a method similar to this to drilling your pen blanks, I align my pen blanks with a little line that I've drawn that's perpendicular with the drill bit, but you have to watch how much of the pen blank is actually sticking up over the vise. If your drill bit gets hot enough and heats up the plastic, it can just actually break in half your blank. Unfortunately, I have done this. And I also use this little piece of scrap wood to keep cleaning the drill bit as I drill the hole. I don't do this as much with wood, but I pretty much do this every time I use acrylic because the plastic just sticks to my drill bit. My theory here is to decrease the heat buildup inside the hole. I probably have about another 10 to 15 minutes of drilling, including finishing this half of the blank and the second half, so I'm not going to show that in the video, but I would just like to say that I take this process, this step of drilling the plastic blanks, really slow, and I just take my time with it. Here's a clip of me finishing one of the drill blanks, and I'll take it off and you can see the holes. And I'll also take one of my barrels and test it through the hole to make sure that it goes through the hole well. Now here I'm just going to take the painted white barrels and use a Flex CA glue. It's a pen maker's Flex glue. I'll apply this glue as even as I can over all of the barrel, and then I'll insert it using my insertion tool here. You don't have to use one of these, but I do. I tend to get glue everywhere, so I'm going to twist it to even out the glue inside of the blank hole on each side, and then I'll push it in, and I'll want it flush with one side, or just about flush to one side, and that would be the side where the ends will come together in the middle band of the pen. In my case, it's the pink ends of these blanks, and then I'll use my accelerator to speed up this whole process. I'd also like to note that I have skipped the barrel sanding step for this particular pen because the barrels are painted white, and if I sand them to get a better bond with the glue, you'll see brass lines in the pen later when it's finished, and I don't want that. I usually don't have a problem with the CA glue bonding as is over the paint to the plastic. Here I'm going to use a carbide barrel trimmer. It will clean out any glue that made its way into the barrel, and also it will flush the barrel and the pen blank so that there is no gaps when you assemble the pen. Now I'll mount my pen blanks to my lathe using a pen mandrel, and I'll prepare for turning. Here is an important step worth showing. With all wood turning, you're going to want some sharp tools, as sharp as you can get them. And here I'm using my bench grinder with my Wolverine jig, and I'm going to just do a quick sharpen or touch up on my spindle roughing gouge. My bench grinder right now, if you're interested, is equipped with a 100 grit wheel, which I'm using right now, and on the other side for really roughing and shaping I have a 60 grit. I can't stress enough, have sharp tools when you're turning acrylics. Now when I'm turning pen blanks, wood or acrylic, I'll usually start with a roughing gouge to true up the blank. It's a fairly aggressive tool, and then I'll use something less aggressive like a skew chisel for final shaping and finishing before sanding. Now I take really light cuts when I turn acrylics. I also take light cuts on wood, but I also take aggressive cuts on wood. I hardly ever take aggressive cuts on an acrylic because you can get tear out, lots of pits and bubbling, and you're more likely to have your blank blow up off the lathe or crack or chip. So don't go too deep with your cuts or try to take too much off at once. Now once your blanks are round and you're making cuts side to side, don't try to plunge in on an acrylic blank because you'll get grooves and valleys. You'll want really fine shavings, or I should say ribbons, that come off. You can see them here, and eventually I'll have to keep stopping the lathe every so often to clear this out, or I can't see what I'm doing, or they'll get so wound on the lathe mandrel that you'll actually have to cut them off. Now, in my experience, if you're not getting these ribbons when you're making your cuts, there's a big chance that your tool or the tool that you're using is not sharp enough. Or it may be the case that you need to stop during your turning and sharpen your tool again because it's become dull. In the case of turning true stone, very hard stuff, and I'll probably sharpen at least 3 times while I'm turning that particular medium. So to answer one of my subscribers' questions, you will definitely need to sharpen your tool, especially if you're getting little fine dust or little tiny granules hitting your hand while you're turning. One of these days I'm going to collect all of these plastic ribbons and I'm going to use it as a filling for holiday or Easter baskets or something. Now, as I had mentioned before, I'm going to now switch to my skew chisel to make finer, less aggressive cuts because my blank right now is thin and it's getting pretty close to my bushings. So I'll just take some really light cuts here and smooth it out, and I'll stop when I'm happy with my shape. You should also be able to see here that the ribbons coming off of the skew chisel are finer than that of the spindle roughing gouge. And that's because the skew chisel is less aggressive than the spindle roughing gouge. So you're going to get those little, like right there, little fine ribbons. You can also notice at this stage in the game, the white from the painted barrels is beginning to show through in between the pink and the purple on each of the pen blanks. One nice feature of turning an acrylic pen versus a wood pen is I get to skip the entire CA finish process that I normally put on wood pens. With an acrylic pen, I'm just going to start with my wet sanding and then go right to a polish. I'll go through all 5 of my Abernet sheet grits, starting with my roughest grit right here, and I'll sand each grit well after the point that I get a little white slurry that develops on the sheet. That helps actually in the sanding process when you get that little pool of plastic grit developing on your pad. I spend most of my sanding time on my first grit, making the pen bodies more towards the shape that I want and to make them even with the bushings. Also to clear out any air bubbles in casting that may still be there, or scratches from tool marks. I want to make sure that it's as smooth as possible right now. Another good tip that I should mention is that when I'm sanding, I sand until I get a little white slurry developing on the sandpaper from the plastic coming off and mixing with the water. And that really helps to have that little wet slurry of plastic when you're sanding. If your sandpaper gets dry, just dunk it again and make sure you keep it wet. After I do my rough sanding, I'll dry the blank with a rag, and then I'll check to make sure that there is no marks visible. I'll use all of my micro mesh pads, and here's the grit, 1500 all the way to 12,000. I'll start with the 1500 and work this for a little bit. Then I'm on to the green 1800, and then the 2400, and then the 3200, and then the 3600, and then 4000. Now the 6000, and then the 8000, and then I'll finish up with pretty much a buff of the 12,000 gray. And here I'll finish this up by applying some one-step plastic polish from PSI, or Penn State Industries. It's a pretty good product. I use it on all of my plastics. I'll let this sit for a few, and then I'll buff it off with a cotton buffing wheel. And I'll usually buff my acrylics at around 4,000 RPMs. Now I'll take my pen blanks off my lathe and move over to my assembly area. I try my hardest to capture the shine here from this pen, but it just doesn't do it any justice. It's like a still pool of water, wet. It's just great. And just to be sure that I assemble the pens correctly, I always refer to the pen kit directions. I have at times didn't look at the directions and put some of the pen components together wrong. And to show you how easy it is to make a mistake, I'll put one of the pen blanks on backwards, and then I'll disassemble it so I can show you how I do that. And here I'm using my jaw horse, it's called, and I use this tool for assembling my pens and pencils and any component that needs to be pressed together. This is the last component that's going to be pressed together, is the ink mechanism, and then I'll just check to make sure that I didn't press it in too far and that the ink protrudes and retracts to a good distance. And now I'll assemble the band and put the pieces together and line them up. And then here is where I notice, oh no, I put them on backwards. I have a purple end matching a pink end. So this is where I'm going to have to disassemble it, and I'll show you how I do that. And here is how I'll disassemble a pen. I'll have to pick which size bar fits inside the tube, and I'll take a pair of my soft rubber tipped vice grip pliers. Also, I purchased at Penn State Industries to hold my pen blank without marring it, and then I'll just take a hammer and quickly tap this out until the cap falls out. And then the bar will push right through, and I'll be set to reassemble my pen so that the colors align in the middle of the pen. You can also use centering punches or Allen wrenches or any other type of little bar that you could probably stick in there that's flat on the end if you don't have a disassembly kit. And here I'm just repressing those parts together. For the final step, I will push these pen parts together and orientate the center together, and then I'm done.